Rome tried to erase her name from history. They smashed her statues, chiseled her from every monument, rewrote the records as if she never existed. But 2,000 years later, you're here, and so is she. This is the story of Valeria Messalina, the 15-year-old who became Empress of Rome and turned the palace into something ancient writers could barely describe without trembling. If you're ready for a story history classes won't touch, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with the wildest historical figure you want us to cover next. Because what you're about to hear, Rome died trying to keep it buried. The year is 48 AD, and somewhere in the marble corridors of the Palatine Palace a woman is getting dressed. Not in the silk gowns of an empress, but in something cheaper, something that smells like the streets. She pulls a dark wig over her golden hair, smudges kohl around her eyes until they look tired and hungry. She checks her reflection one last time, then slips out a side entrance into the Roman night. Her name is Valeria Messalina. She's the Empress of Rome, and she's going to work. The brothel sits in the Subura, where the city sheds its marble skin and shows you what it really is. Narrow alleys that stink of piss and wine, oil lamps flickering in doorways, men stumbling between shadows looking for something they can't find at home. She walks past the beggars and the drunks, like she belongs here because tonight she does. The madam knows her as Lysia, another working girl, another body for rent. A senator from Ostia picks her from the lineup. He's in town on business, killing time before heading home to his wife. He pays his coins, leads her to a room, and never once suspects that the woman beneath him rules an empire. When it's over, he leaves. She stays. There are other clients waiting. By the time the sun starts to rise, she's back in the palace, washing away the cheap perfume, dressing in imperial silk, preparing to attend the morning sacrifice to Vesta, goddess of chastity. Nobody knows. Not yet. But let's rewind, because you don't become this without a story that breaks you first. 4 years earlier, Rome is bleeding. Emperor Caligula has turned the capital into his personal playground of madness. Senators watch as he violates their wives at dinner parties. He appoints his horse to the Senate. He executes people for entertainment, for boredom, because he can. When the Praetorian Guard finally moves on him in January of 41 AD, they don't stop at him. His wife dies beside him. Their infant daughter's skull is smashed against a wall. Rome doesn't just kill its tyrants, it erases their bloodlines. The city is panicking. Who comes next? They find him hiding behind a curtain in the palace, trembling and stammering. Claudius, the family embarrassment, 50 years old, with a limp and a speech impediment. The uncle, nobody took seriously, but he's alive, and he's blood, and Rome needs someone wearing the purple before the whole thing collapses into civil war. The guard proclaims him emperor, whether he wants it or not. Claudius knows he's walking into a burning building. He needs legitimacy fast. He needs heirs. He needs proof that the gods haven't given up on Rome, so he marries Valeria Messalina. She's 15 years old, third cousin, so the bloodline stays pure. Beauty that makes poets build entire careers around describing her face. Pale skin, golden hair, features so perfect they look carved by divine hands. She's been groomed for this moment her entire short life. Educated in virtue, trained to lower her eyes, taught that her entire value exists in her womb and her chastity. She's the living symbol of everything Rome wants to believe about itself. The Senate approves. The people cheer. The empire has a future again. But here's the thing. Nobody asks. What happens when you take a child and tell her she's a goddess? When you put her in a palace where every door opens at her command, where senators bow, where her husband is twice her age and terrified of losing power. When you tell her that her only job is to be modest, obedient, chaste, a living marble statue. When you hand someone unlimited power and then tell them the only rule is never use it, Rome is about to find out. The first 2 years play out like a textbook. Messalina gives Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia, then a son, Britannicus, named after his conquest of Britain. The Senate breathes easier. The bloodline is secure. She appears at state functions, draped in modest silk, head-covered, eyes downcast, every gesture choreographed for virtue, the perfect Roman matron. In public, she's everything they demand. In private, she's building something else entirely. Rome has always divided its women into two categories: the matron and the prostitute, the sacred and the profane, the wife who lives in the atrium raising children, and the whore who works in the brothels where men shed civilization like dirty clothes. The system works because these categories never touch. Messalina decides to be both. The first whispers start around 42 AD. A senator returns late from Ostia, visits the Subura on impulse, pays for a woman in a cramped room that smells like cheap myrrh. When she turns toward him, he recognizes the Empress of Rome. Not a look-alike. Her. The story should end there, should become a scandal that destroys her. But it doesn't. Because what's he going to do? Report the Empress. To whom? To her husband. To the Senate. And say what? That he was in a brothel and saw someone who looked like the most powerful woman in Rome. He says nothing. They all say nothing. She doesn't go once. She goes regularly, adopting the working name Lysia, becoming a fixture at a brothel run by a woman named Scylla. Not for money, not from desperation, for the thrill of it, for the power of walking out of her cage and into the one place where she's supposed to be, invisible. Every client who doesn't recognize her becomes an accomplice. Every man who does becomes someone she owns because his silence makes him guilty. She's not just breaking rules. She's weaponizing the hypocrisy that built them, because Roman morality has always been performance. Senators keep mistresses, generals visit brothels, married men sleep with slaves and nobody blinks. But women, especially aristocratic women, especially the Empress, are supposed to be above desire. Marble statues, breeding vessels, symbols. Messalina looks at that cage and walks out the door. But the brothel is just the beginning, just the laboratory where she learns what she's capable of. The real operation happens inside the palace walls. The banquets start innocently enough. Rome's elite sprawled on silk couches around low tables. Golden platters heaped with roasted dormice brushed in honey. Wine flowing from jeweled cups. Senators making small talk. Generals discussing Britain. Very Roman, very civilized, until Messalina gives a signal. The servants leave, the doors close, new guests arrive, gladiators still smelling of the arena sand and blood and sweat, actors from the theater, foreign captives, sometimes the teenage sons of patrician families summoned under the pretense of discussing their fathers' careers. What happens next, the ancient sources describe with a mixture of horror and fascination. Contests, games, public displays that would make professional prostitutes pause. And here's the genius of it. Everyone who participates becomes complicit. Everyone who witnesses becomes guilty. Messalina isn't just indulging herself. She's building a network of shared shame, a web of secrets that binds the most powerful people in Rome to her will. A senator objects to one of her land grabs. She reminds him about that night in the villa, about what he did, about who saw. He signs over the property. A general questions one of her appointments. She mentions his son, that party, those witnesses. He backs down. She's discovered something Rome's military machine never quite mastered. You don't need an army to control men. You just need to know what they're afraid people will discover. Her mother Lepetta tries to warn her. Tone it down. Be careful. You're making enemies. But Messalina has learned a different lesson. In Rome, there are no limits if you're willing to own people's secrets. Shame is currency. Exposure is execution. She's built a blackmail machine that would make modern intelligence agencies take notes. And then she pushes it further. According to the sources, she challenges a famous prostitute named Scylla to a contest. Who can service more clients in a single night? The details are recorded with the kind of precision that makes you wonder if they're true or if they're propaganda designed to destroy her memory. 25 men. She wins. The story spreads through Rome like a fever whispered in the forum, laughed about in taverns, horrifying the Senate. But what can they do? She's the Empress. She's given Claudius heirs. She's untouchable. Except she's not thinking about limits anymore. She's thinking about what comes next. Gaius Silius is everything Claudius isn't. Young, handsome, from an old patrician family. He's also married to one of the most respected women in Rome. Messalina doesn't care. She wants him, and she's learned that wanting something and taking it are the same thing when you're Empress. She forces his wife to divorce him, not quietly, publicly, with the kind of cruelty that makes it clear what happens when you stand between Messalina and what she desires. Silius becomes her lover. That should be enough. That should be the scandal. But Messalina has spent years learning that there are no consequences if you move fast enough, if you own enough secrets, if you're shameless enough. In the autumn of 48 AD, while Emperor Claudius is in Ostia, overseeing grain shipments that will feed Rome through winter, Messalina does something that shouldn't be possible. She marries Gaius Silius, not in secret, in daylight, with witnesses. A full Roman ceremony, complete with contracts and vows. She's already married to the emperor, but she's marrying someone else anyway, as if daring Rome itself to stop her. Some historians think it was a coup, attempt a plan to install Silius as emperor, with Messalina's children as heirs. Others think she'd simply gone so far beyond boundaries that she'd forgotten they existed. Either way, she throws a party to celebrate. Wine flowing like rivers, music that echoes through the villa, senators and generals in attendance, some willingly, some trapped by years of compromising situations. The whole thing feels like a fever dream, like Rome itself has lost its mind. Meanwhile, in Ostia, Claudius is checking grain ledgers. The message reaches him through Narcissus, his most trusted freedman. Narcissus has been watching Messalina for years, building a case, waiting for the moment she pushes too far. This is it. He brings witnesses. Senators willing to testify now that someone's finally asking questions. The marriage contract signed and sealed and undeniable. Imagine that conversation. Imagine telling an emperor that his wife just married someone else. Imagine making him believe it when it sounds impossible. But the evidence keeps coming. The signatures, the witnesses, the laughter of patrician Rome as it watches its emperor get cuckolded in broad daylight. The rage that comes isn't hot. It's cold. Final. Claudius returns to Rome with the Praetorian Guard at his back. They find her in the gardens of Lucullus, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city where she hosted so many of her parties. She's with her mother. Lepida is begging her to run, to hide, to do something. But Messalina seems frozen, unable to believe that after 10 years of bending Rome to her will, Rome has finally bent back. The soldiers arrive. She recognizes them. She's seen them at the palace, maybe even summoned some of them to her villa. Now they're here for her. She drops to her knees, begs, pleads, offers her children as hostages, Octavia and Britannicus, 9 and 7 years old. Anything, everything. The soldiers don't respond. Orders are orders. She reaches for a dagger. Her hand shakes. She presses the blade to her own throat, but can't finish it. A tribune steps forward and drives the blade home. Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, dies at 25 years old in a pool of blood on the grass, where she once held power over senators. Claudius orders damnatio memoriae, damnation of memory. Her statues are dragged through the streets and shattered. Her name is chiseled from every inscription. Official records are rewritten as if she never existed. The message is clear. She never happened, but 2,000 years later we are still talking about her. The aftermath is brutal in its efficiency. Claudius remarries within months. His niece Agrippina, the younger. She's smarter than Messalina, more patient. She'll eventually poison Claudius and install her son Nero as emperor, beginning another cycle of madness that will make people almost nostalgic for Caligula. Messalina's children suffer fates almost as tragic as hers. Her daughter Octavia is forced to marry Nero, her stepbrother. He'll have her executed years later, claiming adultery. She'll be 22, the same age her mother died. Her son Britannicus will be poisoned at 14, likely by Nero to eliminate any rival claim to the throne. He'll collapse during a dinner party, dead before anyone can move. The Senate pretends Messalina never existed. But the soldiers remember. The servants remember. The families whose daughters disappeared into her villa and came back changed silent, broken, they remember. Here's what haunts historians about her story. How much of what we know is true. The sources are all men writing decades after her death, all with political motives to paint her as a monster. Roman propaganda had a pattern. Powerful women who threatened male authority were always accused of sexual depravity. Cleopatra, Agrippina, Livia, Messalina. The playbook never changed. Does that mean she was innocent? No. The marriage to Silius happened. That's documented even by her defenders. The political corruption was real. The blackmail system existed. People died who opposed her. But the brothel stories, the contests, the specific numbers, we'll never know where the truth ends and the propaganda begins. What we do know is this. A 15-year-old girl stands in the ruins of the Palatine today, and you can feel something in the air. Not ghosts. Rome doesn't do hauntings like that. But something heavier. The weight of stories that couldn't be silenced, even when they chiseled away the names. Because here's the truth about damnatio memoriae. It doesn't work. You can smash the statues, scratch out the inscriptions, rewrite the records, but you can't erase the lessons. Messalina's name was meant to disappear. Instead, it became immortal. Not because Rome wanted her remembered, but because the truth, however twisted, however buried, has a way of clawing back to the surface. Empires get taken down by barbarian invasions, by plague, by economic collapse. But Rome teaches us something way more sinister. They can also rot from the inside out. Messalina's story isn't just about getting down or some juicy scandal. It's about what goes down when power becomes a game, when shame is the new money, when the very people supposed to lead an empire are too dirty to stop it from crumbling. Every senator she put on blast stayed quiet. Every general she had dirt on stayed in line. Every person who saw her parties became part of the cover-up, not because they were loyal, but because of shame. She proved you don't need an army to own a man. You just need to know the secrets they're terrified will get out. We love to tell ourselves we're different now that we're way past the kind of corruption you saw in Rome. But just look around. At any modern empire, any government, any big-shot institution, how many secrets are holding it all together? How many people are just keeping their mouths shut because getting exposed would ruin them? How much of what we call stability is really just everyone being in on the same dirty secret? Marcus Aurelius wrote something about 100 years after Messalina died. He was the emperor then, just trying to wrap his head around Rome's endless cycle of good guys and bad guys. He said, "Look beneath the surface. Don't let the real quality or the true worth of a thing slip by you." He was talking about leaders just like her. People who looked shiny on the outside, but were completely rotten on the inside. But he might as well have been warning us, because the real takeaway here isn't that Messalina was some one-of-a-kind monster. The lesson is that Rome made her. They married her off at 15, gave her a ton of power, with no real point to it, and then took her out when she used that power in a way that called out their own hypocrisy. The Roman Forum is still standing. The Colosseum pulls in millions. But the Palatine Hill where the emperors lived, where Messalina ran, the show is mostly just rubble now. Tourists wander past busted columns and crumbling walls, snapping pictures, reading little signs about Augustus and Nero. They have no idea they're standing in the very rooms where she threw her parties, where senators became her puppets, where shame became the ultimate power play. There's this one spot on the Palatine where the marble floor is still perfect, worn smooth by 2,000 years of footsteps. If you stand there at sunset, after all the tour groups are gone, and the shadows start to stretch, you can almost see her. The girl in the dark wig sneaking out into the Roman night. The empress draped in silk running games that would make the whole city blush. The woman in the garden on her knees, begging for her life from soldiers who used to bow to her. She died at 25. Most people today get to live 3 times that long and never make even a tiny ripple. She ruled for less than 10 years, and her name still echoes through thousands of years. Not because Rome wanted it to, but because Rome tried so damn hard to erase her that they made her impossible to forget. Her story lives in that gap between who we're told to be and what we really want, in that space between public perfection and private hunger, in the question of what happens when someone just refuses to play by the rules meant to keep them in a cage. Rome handed her a script. Be humble, be pure, be a symbol. She ripped it to shreds and wrote her own, and when they killed her for it, they proved she was right all along about one thing. Real power doesn't come from following the rules. It comes from knowing which ones you gotta break. The bloodstains washed away centuries ago. The palace fell to ruin. The empire that tried to wipe her from memory is long gone. But on an autumn night in 48 AD, a woman in a dark wig slipped out of the Palatine Palace and walked straight into the history books, not as the perfect little wife they wanted her to be, but as something they could never ever destroy. Messalina. Remember that name. Rome tried to forget it. They failed.